Item then is 40 on page 95, which is two furnished cottages, a single-storey front extension to dwelling and covered porch. It's before the committees, it's been listed by Councillor Lee, and the case officer is Darius. I'm going to struggle because it says. Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening. The application reference number 172013, the site to Budges Cottages, Keepage Road. It's the household application for the proposed erection of a single-story front extension to dwelling and covered porch. The application site is in an area on the outskirts of Wokingham, which consists groups of dwellings of diverse style and form. The host dwelling is located on a corner plot. It is facing Keepage Road to the west and does not match any of the design patterns when compared to the existing buildings in a surrounding area. Number 2, Budges Cottages, is surrounded by a group of uniform terraced houses to the north and detached dwellings to the west and northwest and green public space to the south. The main dwelling is also set back by approximately 16.5 meters from the highway, when the terraced houses to the north are approximately 6 meters set back from the edge of the highway. The proposal is for the erection of a single-story front extension to form a new entrance porch to the dwelling with a sympathetic pitched roof and gable entrance. This would measure approximately 1.5 meters in depth, 6.4 meters in width, and it would be 3.2 meters high. The proposed extension would come close to the boundary with number 1, Budges Cottages. It would comprise a pitched roof and a 2.3 meter high eaves, being approximately 80 centimeters from the ground floor front elevation habitable window of the adjacent property, number 1. It would project exactly 1.46 centimeters beyond the existing frontage of the pair of semi-detached dwellings, and it is considered that it would not cause any overbearing impact. The proposal would marginally infringe a 45-degree sideline from the habitable ground floor window of number 1. However, given its single-story scale, insignificant projection beyond the front elevation, and position of the application dwelling to the north of the neighbor, number 1, it does not lead to an unacceptable level of overshadowing. Despite of corner plot positioning, the application house is not considered to have a prominent positioning due to significant setback and landscaping in a front garden, which provides partial screening of this semi-detached dwelling. This is the front elevation. View from southwest, where we can see a partial screening due to detached garage in the front garden of number 1. We can see here the view from Moose Green, which is to the west of the application property. Again, the application property and the entire semi-detached house is partially screened by the protected tree in the front hedge. And the view from northwest, again, more significant screening visible due to hedge along the terraced houses to the north, protected tree, and this photo also clearly presents how the setback of the semi-detached dwelling is more significant than the terraced houses, which effectively causes a less prominent position when compared to the neighboring terraced houses to the north. Members update comments received from the Wokingham Town Council. Objection on the grounds that the proposed extension projects forward the building plan and will cause a loss of light to the front room of the adjoining property. And recommendation: the proposed single-story front extension would not have a harmful impact on the character of the area or the residential amenities of neighboring properties. Given the single-story scale, insignificant projection of the proposal beyond the front elevation, and the position of the application dwelling to the north of the neighbor, it does not lead to an unacceptable level of overshadowing. it is recommended then to grant that permission by the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have two speakers registered. The first one from Wokingham Town Council, Andrew Waters. I'd like to come forward. Good evening.
Chairman, members of the committee, the Planning Committee of Wokingham Town Council wishes to object to this application for the following reasons. Budge's Cottage is a development of 8 cottages which well represent an older type of housing which is sadly disappearing in our town. As such, it has a unique street scene which defines a small area on and just off Keephatch Road. Having read the Borough Planning Department's submission on this application, it is our belief that the distinctive nature of this small area has not been considered in terms of comparison with the other dwellings around. Where the comparison's been made, the other dwellings are in fact far more modern than this one, so in our opinion that negates any comparison. Furthermore, the recommendation does not take into account the full impact of this proposal on the amenity of the neighbouring cottage. Section 4.2 of the Borough Design Guide states that residential development should be designed to contribute positively towards the historic or underlying character and quality of the local area. It is our submission that this proposed development is in contrast to the character of the cottages and will degrade what is regarded as a small historic area by the residents. Budge's Cottages is a created place, as described in section 4.5 of the Borough Design Guide, in that it defines the street space with a coherent building line that forms a positive characteristic of this area. This fundamental change to the design, in our opinion, would spoil this definition and distract from the coherence of the original frontal design of the cottages. We are also concerned that this development will impact on the amenity of the neighbouring cottage, causing a loss of light in the front ground floor room. The officer's report confirms that the 45-degree sightline has been infringed, and we believe that due to the small window size, so common in smaller, older cottages of this nature, the effect of this would be significant. We would therefore urge you to reject this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And the final speaker on this item is David Lee, Ward Member.
Thank you. Could I ask that the picture of the front-on picture of the cottages is put on the screen here? These cottages do not form any part of the surrounding character. They form their own character. That is crystal clear from many appeals. You cannot assess this against a 12-year-old development to the left-hand side of it. The only character it has been pointed out by running up to the right-hand side. If you look at that development, the development to the left, on the left cottage, has a subservient extension which fits in. And let me just draw your attention to the document which refers to previous applications 2005-3902, 14-1102. It says very clearly in there, there is a setback, talking about that extension, from the front of the property, which would be visible from Keephatch Road. Due to its size, scale, etc., setback would not have an adverse impact on the street scene. The same is exactly said on the other planning application. Yet somehow, also the officer says in his report that it says here very clearly, in fact, page 98, policy of the core strategy, that's our document being examined in public. It said, if you look at the second paragraph, last bit, it says, without detriment to the amenities of adjoining land uses and occupiers. Well, it certainly does. Look at page 99. There's a term in here which says, although full width front extensions would generally be discouraged by virtue of a setback position, in this case it's okay basically because it's a big garden. These cottages are about over 100 years old. They're part of the history of this borough. And we say that generally we wouldn't allow this. The officer also compares it to porch extensions in the other area, which says generally do not go the full width of the property. There are various other points that have been pointed out, 45%, marginally, impacts upon them. I would suggest that the residents in that cottage to the right would not be marginalised by a 1.5 metre brick wall jutting out from their window about 6 inches from it. You cannot assess the impact from this presentation, or this report. You have to go on a site visit, Chairman, to see that this is a unique character, and to describe it in any way as associated with a development built 15 years before, which was approved and appealed, cannot possibly stand up. If you are a committee which wants to make sure that we do high quality building, then you should go and see this and you form your own professional opinion. But if that property wanted to extend to the right to balance one on the left, it would have to comply with what we have said in the past. Be subservient, set back from that. But somehow to say, because you've got a big front garden and you're joined to another little cottage beside you, you can do what you like at the front. I don't think that's right. It doesn't follow the building line. There is a unique building line here, and that is those 2 cottages. It has nothing to do with the development to the north. And the development to the south is a greenfield. So please go on a site visit, refer this until you've done it, and I'm sure you will come to the same conclusion that I have, that this is a very bad design and should be rejected.
Thank you very much, David. Before I open it up to members, if you could come back on a couple of these points. So if you could comment on the distinctive nature of the area and whether it's got its own character, and the impact on the neighbouring property, and if you do know how much it is affecting the 45-degree angle, and if you could comment on the extension going all the way across at the front, and the final one, if you could comment on the building line, please.
With regards to the question about the distinctiveness, no conservation area. The building is not a listed building. The building is very set back, which is not prominently positioned. Although it's a corner plot positioning, I do not see any distinctiveness. With regards to an impact on neighbors and 45 degrees rule, I've mentioned in a report that it would infringe but not to an unacceptable level. There are 2 types of 45 degrees tests, horizontal and vertical. Horizontal, where we can see from the perspective, well, from the top, 45 degrees according to the BRE guidelines with regards to daylight and sunlight impact. It would infringe these 45 degrees by less than 50%. It would be approximately 45% of the window that would be overshadowed. And in connection with this 45 degrees rule, there is a second test which is, from this perspective, 45 degrees from the middle of the pitch of the window, and it would again overshadow the window by about 40%, which is again less than 50%. 50% is the central part of the window, recommended by BRE guideline to recommend a refusal. When it's more than 50% of the window overshadowed, then according to this guideline, the refusal would be justified. In this instance, it would be less than 50%. That's why although it would infringe, it would be not to an unacceptable level. Thank you.
The building line as well?
Building line, the property, as I've mentioned, on the block plan, on the location plan, sorry, we cannot make assessment of a building line without taking into consideration the surrounding area. The building line, and this is the most prominent, most highlighted, most important building line that we can see to the north along the terraced houses and the detached houses. This is the building line that is most prominent in this area. When there is a front extension with a dwelling which is set back by about 60 meters, it's about 10.5 meters more than the terraced houses to the north, it becomes acceptable and in accordance with the board design guides, which says that the front extensions generally are acceptable only in dwellings which are significantly set back from the highway, and are not breaching the established building line. The established building line is along the terraced houses to the north.
Sorry, established recently, not when that was still.
No, David, we can't
I
take.
understand that apologies.
Right, with ward member, sorry, ward member then is Malcolm, and then I'll be coming to Angus.
Thank you. I tend to agree with the objection based on the basis that these are old buildings. They won't necessarily have the same rules as the new ones. They are buildings in that era generally of character. If you change the two houses glued together, and if one of them has a substantial change when they're basically both normally quite similar, that would be noticeable and would change the character of it. I'm personally less aware of the building line aspect of it, but cutting out light from windows, especially on old houses where the windows tend to be smaller anyway, I think 40% or that sort of number is quite a lot to cut out light. So it changes the appearance of it changes the character, it cuts out the light, and I would like to preserve some of the character of those houses, and that's the reason I'm likely not to support it.
I'm thinking that was more of a comment there you made, Malcolm, than a question.
Yes, it was about the, well, I suppose it's confirmation that it's 40% of a window. You have the window sizes, but whatever the window size is, 40% of it is a lot.
Will you come back on that, or you're just going to agree that it's always this 40%?
With,
Yes,
so please could you repeat the question once again?
It's a comment that the windows aren't enormous. I have a thing myself about design and size of windows. I find that a lot of windows make smaller in the modern developments now, whether it's for environmental reasons or whatever, I don't know. I do know it makes the inside of the houses very dark, so you end up having to switch the lights on all day. So in an older house which has smaller windows and tends to be darker than modern houses anyway, 40% of cutting out the light is significant to me. So it changes the character and it cuts out the light, and for those two reasons I don't.
Okay, so with regards to the change of the character of the areas, we can see the detached garage in the front is not of any traditional character. It is a typical garage for the major development location, which is the largest cottages are located in. And with regards to overshadowing and the smaller windows or the type of windows, the BRE guide with regards to the daylight and sunlight, which I've referred to, is taking into consideration any size of windows. As I've mentioned previously, the 50% overshadowing is the maximum level of acceptable overshadowing, which would not justify the reason of the refusal. So it takes into consideration that type of windows as well.
Yes, I think it does have an impact, and that would be my reason.
Angus, then Wayne.
Thank you, Chairman. I do know the site. I agree the buildings are set back. I agree it's not in a conservation area, but there is a character to this particular pair of buildings. The proposal is not adding any particular number of rooms to this, and the addition done next door does appear to be much more in sympathy with the pair of buildings. I believe that to get an informed view for the whole committee, it would be advisable to have a site visit, and I propose a site visit to look at the local character, the setting and the impact of this development.
Wayne, if you just talk before we see if anyone wants to second it. Yeah, please talk, yes.
Can I just show you here, Darius? If you look at that plan, got it? So it shows you minus the actual size of the external brick. These are 100 years old, so take away, what, 9 inches. So you're sticking out about 1.2 metres from the...
1.46.
Is it?
1.46.
Oh, that's interesting, because that means you then got a 400mm brick wall. That's quite a lot. But anyway, let's go back to this. So it's coming out 1.46. It's not coming out anything there.
We've got the gable open,
Yep.
with a sympathetic gable.
So go back to here, done by the same architect. It's saying it's sticking out almost in line with what the neighbours is looking to do, as per that. But on the block plan, it's showing on number 1 that the actual porch isn't coming out. But that's not my point. But that's a very relevant point. But if you go back to this, how have you taken your BRE calculation? Because if it's coming out 1046 and you've got that very small window, how have you taken into account the previous porch? Is there a porch there on number 1? How far does it stick out? And what parameters did you use when you were using the BRE calculator?
I do not understand how the porch of number 1 is relevant to overshadowing of number 2. So
Well, because if that is drawn as it is there, if you look at that now, the block plan is very different. As I said, that is not the same as that, the previous one, yeah? So one's a straight line, one shows a porch going out at number 1, right? So what I'm interested in, or what you decided is the factor that you used. Did it have a porch at number 1 or didn't? Because it will make a material difference when you use BRE in terms of loss of light. Does that make sense?
yes, it does make sense. And again, the assessment was that there is no unacceptable impact and all of the factors were taken into account.
Yeah, Mark's just going to come back and just turn you around. Mic off, please.
Are you saying that number 1's own porch is reducing its light to its window?
Well, I deal with the BRE all the time in my day job, and I know that they use calculators. So if you were to put the that window in, you would have to put 2 factors in. You would have to put the distance coming this way from the neighbouring, you would have to put your existing, and you would have to put the height of your porch. All I'm asking is what calculations have you used to come up with the fact that you said it's just breaching the 50%? Because you said at the beginning in your summary that it was 50%. All I'm saying is, how have you come up with 50%? Because you know, I do take the point about the garage, because they should have, you know, when they're trying to preserve the character of that area, you know, that isn't a great way of preserving it, that awful garage. But anyway, that's there. The building line, I agree with David, it's unique. My point is the loss of light to number 1.
As I mentioned, the assessment was prepared in accordance and calculations and the drawings as well by myself, accordingly with the BRE guidelines. And based on that, no unacceptable overshadowing. I do not have the drawings with me, I do not have the calculations with me.
Okay, yeah, it's fine.
I prepared before my recommendation with regards to the overshadowing impact.
Yep.
I was going to say, if we should happen to vote that we have a site visit, we can make sure that those figures are brought to the next meeting.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Andy that a site visit would be beneficial. When you look at these drawings, the extensions that are shown here are quite sympathetic to its original design, but I'd like to see the materials that are proposed to be used, or the materials that need to match the existing building. I don't know what the materials are of the existing building. I think a site visit for that purpose, just to see whether it's in keeping with the apartment development.
Are there any other comments? So I suspect we are going to vote in favour of a site visit. I would like to ensure that we've talked through all the other issues we have. So if it does come back, we'll have all the answers to everybody's questions. And so we have talked it out. Absolutely no more questions. Right. Now I've already had a seconder for it, which was John. Was seconding it. You indicated to me very early on that you wanted to second it. So we'd be going on site visits for to see the distinctive nature of the area, to see that it's got its own character. We're going to look at the impact of that extension on the neighbouring property in terms of the light. perhaps you could go inside that other house and just see what it's like at the moment and try and understand what 40 or 50% less light is going to do to the room. And then we also just look at the materials, what the current building is made of, to understand what we would want if we were to approve it subsequently. So we've had it, we've put motion put forward, we've had it seconded. All those in favour of a site visit, please show. And that is unanimous. We will be going on a site visit. Application of the evening. Agenda item 41 or page 101 is 5 Hatchgate cottages. It's a part single, part 2-storey side, rear and front extension plus a porch. It's before the committee as it's been listed by Councillor Horsall. Members went on a site visit on Friday, and Case Officer Omar Sharif, so I shall hand over to him.
The site is 5 Hatchgate cottages, and the application is for the proposed erection of a part single-storey, part 2-storey side rear and front extension dwelling, which is the erection of the front porch. The site is located outside of settlement boundary, and is within the metropolitan green belt countryside. The application in question is a 2-storey semi-detached dwelling set along a similar row of properties overlooking Clockwell Green along Country Lane. Obviously the application again, as I said, is an extension of the property to the side and rear by 2 stories, as well as the creation of the new front porch. The MPPF is very clear in section 9 with regards to the preservation of the openness of the green belt, and obviously in conjunction to that, the council has strict policies in place to prevent inappropriate development of the green belt, restricting extensions to dwellings to a limited scale of 35%. That's in policy TBO1, so that is a policy, not a guideline. So the volume of the existing house is measured in the supporting information submitted by the applicant, measures some 300 cubic metres, and that the volume of the proposed development subject to this application measures some 308 cubic metres. This is just to show the additions to that. So the proposed obviously development would represent an increase in volume of some 102%, and in policy terms, and by definition, this is inappropriate development. So obviously this is the existing elevations, proposed elevations. So obviously, as you can see, the proposed extension would project from the rear side elevation of the existing buildings greater than 2 stories, and therefore would lead to an appreciable reduction in openness of the green belt by virtue of its width, depth, height, therefore representing clearly a disproportionate addition to the original building. No very special circumstances to outweigh the harm of the openness of the green belt were submitted by the applicant. There were various discussions. However, the increased family space is not precedent when measuring impact on the openness of the green belt, and neither is precedent in the street scene. So, having what's within the street is not a very special circumstance or material consideration. because obviously we've got the 5 purposes of the green belt, which you know, is to stop encroachment, and yeah, there we go. So just going on to the recommendation, the proposed extensions would enlarge the volume of the original dwelling beyond 35%, and as such the proposal will result in extensions which are excessive in scale and detrimental to the open and rural character of the green belt, and therefore represents inappropriate development within the green belt, contrary to policy CV12 of the core strategy and policy TV01 of the managing delivery plan, and section 9 of the national design policy framework. So,
thank you very much. We have two registered speakers. The first one is David Bates, the agent. If you'd like to come forward. Please welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. 1 to 6 Hatchgate cottages are traditional farm workers' cottages that sit within the centre of Copwell Green, which is within the green belt. The cottages have over the years been considerably enlarged, with number 5 almost as originally built, number 3 enlarged by 99%, and number 4 enlarged by 88%. All of the cottages have been enlarged within the domestic garden constraints and do not encroach into the adjoining greenbelt canal. The street scene has been established over many years and still retains its rural appearance. My brief was to provide a family home for the client with a building that will fit next to similar cottages and bring this derelict building back to life, also provide a home for my client and his family who are currently renting property in the village. They very much like to stay in the village and at the local school, etc. The immediate neighbours have been consulted and some changes have been implemented in line with their wishes. We believe that they have no objections. In addition, it should be noted that there were very unsightly outbuildings within the gardens of this site and have been removed. These amounted to 120 cubic metres, which has created more openness in the site generally. The officer is rejecting the application on the grounds that a guideline of 35% enlargement of the greenbelt countryside is appropriate and should be rigidly adhered to. Each property must be considered in its immediate environment, and in this case the neighbouring cottages have mostly been enlarged to the same degree as our proposal for the 5 category cottages. Most gardens have the right to build leisure buildings up to 50% of the plot area, including the house, within the greenbelt. This is a permitted development right given strictly within domestic gardens of greenbelt country properties. In designing this building, the option of sticking to permitted development rights was not used because it would have resulted in a less sympathetic building. For example, the rear could be extended full width, 2 stories, 3 metres into the garden, and a single-storey extension to the side, up to the side boundary. Then an enlarged rear roof and even a first floor roof, flat roof would be possible. None of these design elements will be the best option, but could also lead to an enlargement of around 80 to 90%. We've tried to take the sensible and responsible design route. We have received support from 11 residents and the Walgrave Parish Council that commented, on balance the design is compatible with neighbouring development and contained with the existing building line and therefore will not impact on the openness of the greenbelt. To sum up, the 35% extension in the greenbelt is a guide. This may not be a guide to the policy as has been pointed out, but it's the national framework policy. It's a guide. Sorry, should I stop now?
Well, if you've got just something to sum up.
Well, just to sum up, basically we believe that that on balance it's the same. It's not unsustainable, not inappropriate, and doesn't encroach into the greenbelt, but is strictly within domestic garden and matches well with the adjoining garden.
Thank you very much. Very last speaker for the evening then is John Wilson, the board member, if you'd like to come forward. Good evening to you, John.
First of all, thank you, sir, and all the members for considering this very, very late listing, which under normal rules wouldn't have been allowed. So thank you very much. Particularly for the chairman for bypassing all these the procedures, normal procedures. And thank you to Omar, who has acted very properly and agreed with the application in every point but one. And thank you for the effort that you put into it. As you know, I'm a Greenbelt warrior to the core and a true tree hugger. And whilst new dwellings in the Greenbelt should be forbidden, for those that are there, they need to be living. It should not be a mausoleum. It's important that this house is a home. It is the 35% rule, which is a guideline. It's been referred to as being a policy, and we've adopted it in the NDD, but it is an MPPF guideline. And therefore, in this case, I would ask you to consider that guideline and whether it really makes sense, because if you look at a Google map of these 3 buildings, or 4 buildings as they are, this is the one which is almost unique in that it's been left alone. All the other buildings, let's get better in colour actually on my phone. All the other buildings have been extended to almost exactly as the applicant is asking them. The test in the MPPF is the harm to the openness to the green belt, and I would say that this actually gives no harm to all the openness of the green belt because it's comparatively hidden in what is a terrace. It really doesn't make a sense in the absolute terms given the configuration of the houses as they are. So I ask you to please approve this, or if you are not prepared to approve this on the grounds of our own policies, can we just have another shot at trying to find whether there's a compromise which the applicant can live with and the officer can live with. Thank you very much. And thank you very much again.
Okay, that concludes the speakers. I was just going to come back to some of those points if Austin could help me. If you could just talk us through the extensions that the cottages in the near vicinity got, because I've heard there some of them are in the region of 90%. Could you explain to me what the harm would be to the green belt if we were to approve it? And could you just clarify this 35%? Is it a guide or is it policy?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, the MPPF is very clear in the sense of the purposes of the green belt in the first instance. You know, inter alia, paragraph 80 is to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment. And then it further elaborates in paragraph 89 that the local planning authority should regard the construction of new buildings as inappropriate in development. Exceptions to this are obviously the extension or alteration of a building provided that it does not result in disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building. And then that leads on to the strict policy in the MDD plan. It's not a guideline, and that leads to the 35% rule, whereby it states that anything over that is regarded as inappropriate.
Okay, thank you. All right, open it up to members. Who wants to go for Angus, then John?
Thank you, Chairman. I think it was very useful for us to have a site visit there. I don't think it totally clarified everything for us. If I could first ask the planning officer to comment on the extension that's there on number 4, and whether the NPPF in any way changes the consideration of a similar development to that particular property, and then if I could come back after that.
Okay, you have to be mindful that if we look at 1997, there was a proposed single-storey rear extension to dwelling which was approved, and then a few years later there was the application to build obviously a rear extension on the first floor over that, which was refused. But obviously I would ask you to be mindful that this was done in 1997 in the year 2000, which was prior to the MPPF and also our up-to-date manage and delivery plan, which was adopted in 2014. So, substantial weight has to be given to that today, regardless of what happened, almost 17, 20 years ago.
Thank you for that, Chairman. I think our original or earlier rules were 50%, but 35% going up to 102% is a hell of a, it's nearly 3 times. And I think we have seen refusals on greenfield developments, let alone green belt developments, increases of that sort of proportion. So it's really the question of is there sufficient evidence here to set aside our policies, and would it set a serious precedent? And taking the last point that Councillor Horsall made, if we believe that this should be refused, and something could be developed for a reasonable dwelling at or around the 50%, would we consider to defer this application for such a conversation?
Moss, would you like to comment on that, case?
The council should aim to determine all applications within 8 weeks. If the applicant didn't want a decision on the current application, they could have withdrawn it. It would be better to make a decision on this application rather than defer it indefinitely for further discussions.
Wayne?
Unfortunately, I didn't go on the site visit, but part of my question was asked by Angus in relation to number 4, and you've answered it, Omar. But also I understand that number 3 has also got a significant increase, and it just seems bad luck. I mean, I'm certainly not swaying on the 102%, but it seems damn hard luck if you're living next to number 4 and number 3, the rules changes and you're almost like the odd one out. But do you know if number 3 and number 6 have also had significant increases above 50%?
As I've said in the planning history, number 3, and it's documented in where the inspector dismissed the appeal, that the application proposed then was over the 35% threshold of volume. Obviously they have come in with a certificate of lawfulness, and similarly, I've discussed this with the applicant. There are certain elements of work you can do with permitted development, which would result in a structure which is over 35%. But still, having said that, I believe number 3, from what I've been told, it's been expanded beyond 35%. Well, I mean that's something for our enforcement team to look at. But the council policy is very strict, and there's no compromise on that. It's 35% or nothing.
So, to build on Angus's other point, Marcia, if the applicant was to withdraw it tonight, would that be acceptable? And work with the officer?
No, that isn't acceptable. We need to make a decision.
Right. I've got Michelle, John, then Malcolm.
Permitted development on a house like that is what, 4 meters back in the back? Can you put 4 meters back and extension in the back, a single story 4 meter back?
Yes.
So this would take, and this would be more than 35% probably. I do agree that mausoleums are very nice in cemeteries, but trying to keep everything the way it was in 1743 or 1897 gets a little bit ridiculous after a while. That we do need to go with the times and be able to do things that are keep families in Wokingham and keep them doing things the right way.
Yeah, this is just a couple of questions. I'm getting sort of a conflicting view on policy and guidance. Is it true what the applicant's agent said, that the MPPF talks about it as guidance and we have it as a policy, which I understand is something that we would not want to. But if it's treated as guidance in the MPPF, would that mean that if we were to allow it, for instance, that wouldn't necessarily set precedent?
The MPPF is guidance. Policy TB01 in the MDD is adopted policy and needs to be given the utmost weight.
So we can't have pick and mix, basically. We can't choose one we want. Okay, that's really okay. The other one is that I'm interested in the application of a certificate for lawfulness, where we approved the erection of a single-storey side and rear extension to the dwelling. What were the measurements of that, and what size was that, and when was that approval given?
That was approved in 2013. I have tried to look through the planning history with regards to any submitted information. There were none in the system, but as I reiterate, you know, planning and having permitted development rights allow you to do some works to the house without requiring permission. And yes, it could be that the volume might be more than 35%, but notwithstanding that, if you were to do something through planning, you know, we then consider the actual policies as they are. You know, so every case on its own merits. But as I've said before, in this case, as well as when measuring up very special circumstances, precedent is not a material consideration.
Okay, so let me just understand that. In the event that we follow our policy guidelines tonight, which we've had made very clear to us that policy is something that we shouldn't breach, and we can't choose to use the MPPF because we've adopted a 35% policy. Does that mean that if we were to refuse that tonight, the applicant could come back with the same sort of changes that were made at number 3 for an application for a certificate of lawfulness?
Yeah, as I've discussed with the agent, there are, I mean, at that time we didn't take any volume calculations, but we looked at the sort of works that we can do within using permitted development rights, which include a side and rear extension, which would likely go over the volume, but that's obviously you know, notwithstanding having to, if it was, for example, if it was a large rear extension, we would have to look at amenity, but obviously there are, it could come in with a rear 2-storey extension which didn't exceed 3 metres from the property boundary, and you know, a rear dormer at the roof space as well, which shouldn't exceed, I believe, 50 cubic metres of the cubic content of the original roof space, and so that therein lies the answer to that question.
So what I'm asking is that if he was to use that as a pattern to to come forward for a certificate of lawfulness. He could use that as a pattern if he wanted to, because it was 2013, so it was not back in the dark ages before we adopted the policy.
We have something called the fallback position.
Right.
So if the applicant could build something under permitted development rights, they could argue, well, if you don't approve my planning permission, I'm going to build this. The amount of weight you have to give to the fallback position depends on the likelihood of the applicant building the permitted development extension, and we've already heard that that would not be preferable. So my advice would be, we don't need to give too much weight to the fallback position, and we do need to give a lot of weight to our adopted policy.
Okay, I wasn't saying for one moment that it would be used as a reason to approve the application, because you've been very clear about the policy. I'm just saying that there is an alternative, I'm trying to come up with an alternative option, which is both Angus and so the alternative option would be to go away, look at the pattern at number 3, and then submit for an application certificate of lawfulness. You could do that.
Even if you were to approve this application this evening, the applicant could submit certificates of lawfulness for anything which he believes is permitted development.
That's fine. Let's clear that up.
Malcolm?
I'm finding all these options a bit clouded, really. It does seem rather unfortunate that 3 and 4 have had a couple of approvals each, and this poor chap, because he didn't do it early enough, is suddenly stuck with the house almost as it is. Especially when number 5 could apply for permitted development and get away with a lot of increase that way, spend the money and still not have what he wants, and so a resident will probably end up moving away. We need to have some common sense about it. If it's a policy that we dare not break, then I suppose we have to follow that, even if it seems unfair. The thing is that if we approve this, who would be complaining about it? Is it we would be breaking our policy, which is the problem, and then we wouldn't be able to use it elsewhere, I suppose, is the problem. But I'm interested in these other options where people are talking about using alternative schemes for achieving the same sort of growth. One specific question. This 35% expansion, is that 35% on the original house design and size, or 35% on what's there now? So if, for instance, every year somebody keeps sticking 10% on, is it 35% of the latest or 35% of the original?
It's 35% of the original, and if this application is refused tonight, we will continue to work with the applicant to try and find an acceptable scheme.
I'll just add that I have spoken to the applicant prior, and we have discussed the solution through permitted development, but clearly, I mean, that's not something that they want to, from an understanding I had, that they wanted to go through. So, I think we need to make a decision today.
Okay, members.
Mine's not a question, it's really an observation. Having done a site visit, this house is, or the property is coming into sort of derelict state, and it seems a considerable shame that the guy who's trying to improve this property is being restricted. And it says on page 105, 17, the design is considerably compliant with the existing appearance of the dwelling with regard to design, and as such, the proposal is not considered to detract from the character of the property. This property can be brought back into livable conditions, and rather than fall into disrepair. And hearing that the chances are that he won't go for permitted development, the possibility is he walks away from this and the place becomes irreparable, falls into total disrepair, never to be occupied again, and I think that's a great shame.
I think we're only guessing what will happen.
Well, yeah.
Because it is a nice house in a very nice area. I think somebody will come along and buy it, and most certainly go into their permitted development, which we have heard tonight, would be still quite a substantial increase in size. Right, Rochelle?
it's not a nice house, it's a derelict house, and I think it's in pretty bad shape right now and is only going to fall down at this point. Maybe that will be the solution. When it falls down accidentally, then he can do what he wants.
Again, Michelle, we know that is not true quite what you said. There still would be there's no need to come back, there still would be the same policies in place for a new build if it did fall down. This is a serious application in front of us. We have heard from the officers that we do have a clear policy of 35%. This is in the region of 102%. So we say we've had clear direction from the officers. So the recommendation is for refusal, set out on page 101 and just goes down there to 102. There's nothing in the members' update. So all those in favour of the refusal, please shout. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those voting the other way is 3. So, and 1 abstention. So that means this application is refused. Thank you, members and public. Thank you.